Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Hey, good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning to you. Good morning to you. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that you are having a great and wonderful day. We have a lot to talk about today. For those of you who are new, this is Black Table Talk, where we talk all things Black, all things Black history. And we're going to start out by talking about some things that are in the news or in the Black news. And we have something to talk about with education, with law, with the arts, with business, unfortunately with crime, and in entertainment. So I just want to run down a couple of things that are happening in Black news that you may or may not have heard about. Good morning, Lady Ravonda. I'm going to ask if you would share this broadcast out to your platforms and your sphere of influence. If you'll take a moment to do that as I set my books up here. Today we're going to be looking at The Color of Compromise by Jemar Tisby. We are still in the first chapter, just started that one last week. We're also going to be looking at Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America by Dr. Stacey Patton. And we're also going to start at today, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, who was actually on the news this morning trying to explain to people how do we know if something is racist. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what he talked about, and that clip of that broadcast is also on Daring Dialogues. You can go back and look at it after today's broadcast. It's also on our Facebook page, Black Table Talk. So if you're looking for a place with news without a lot of profanity, I have created that page for you. You can go to my Facebook page and like Black Table Talk. All right. If you're looking for a page with lots of inspiring stories, you can go to my page, Facebook page, find Black Table Talk, and like the page. If you are looking for inspiration, if you are looking for encouragement, if you're looking for positivity on a sometimes very negative space in social media, you can go to my Facebook page, Black Table Talk. And so we are talking all things Black people from North America, Central America, South America, and the African diaspora. All right, that's what that page is designed for. Our news for us, by us. Good morning, Lady Judy, or good afternoon, shall I say. So I'm very thankful to be in the land of the living another day. Also, if you're on my Periscope, you can also find my Facebook page, Daring Dialogues, which covers a gamut of topics and news and interests. That's general topics and news and interests. That's Daring Dialogues. And you are right now on the live broadcast. So let's talk about what's happening in Black news. On the entertainment side, people are losing their minds because of two very interesting entertainment news pieces. And that is, number one, Ariel from the Mermaid. Ariel, the mermaid from Disney, is being played by a Black actress. I don't have her name on me today because I'm just going through this very quickly, but it's all over the news. And people are losing their minds for various reasons. Some are saying that she doesn't have red hair, as if Black people don't come in all shades and types and hair colors and eye colors. They do. All right. There are blue-eyed Black people. There are people who are as dark as my sweater who have blue eyes and green eyes. Yes. Black people, DNA-wise, genetic-wise, can produce all different sorts of mixes. So yes, there are Black people with red hair. This is not an anomaly. My sister has red hair. She's Black. All right. So if that is your issue as to why she cannot play the part, yeah, they can dye her hair red and it's not an anomaly. The other part of that, the other interesting part of that is, if you start doing a little bit of digging, you will find that there were African tales of mermaids called Mami Wata. Okay, you can look that up, Mami or Mama Wata, W-A-T-A. All right, so this whole notion that there's no such thing as Black mermaids, again, dispelled with a little bit of research. Do your research, people. Do your research. All right, the other part in entertainment news is 007, the famous series 007, will be played by a Black British woman. Again, people are losing their minds over this. I don't know. It's entertainment, people. Some people are losing their minds because they think that they're replacing James Bond, when if, again, you read a little bit deeper, they're not turning her into James Bond. She's simply taking on the code name 007. All right. And the former Bond, the latest former Bond, is actually going to be in the next film in the series. I believe this is number 25. So some people are upset that a quote unquote Black woman was chosen over a Black man, because many people were rooting for Idris Elba to play the part. But they decided to go another way. And of course, they're the ones funding the project, so it was their choice and their decision. So if you're interested in those two movies, just know that there's some controversy around those two. In crime, unfortunately, this is very, very, very sad. Museum owner Sadie Roberts Joseph was now found. At first, they were saying that she was found dead in the trunk of her car. And now they have done all the testing and they realized that it was indeed a homicide and she was murdered. She was suffocated. And so this is very sad news for Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She was the founder of Baton Rouge African American History. I want to encourage and admonish and warn activists out here to be careful, especially our older activists, younger activists. Please watch out for your elders out here in these streets. We know that the level of vitriol and hatred that is now being directed again to not only people of color, but most specifically to African Americans and indigenous African Americans to this nation. What do I mean by indigenous? Meaning that if your ancestors were brought over here enslaved and you were born after that time period, you are considered indigenous to this country. You did not come from somewhere else. So you are an indigenous Black American or American Black, however you want to say that. So please watch out for your elders, activists. Please be careful out here. I know sometimes people think that only the people who are the loudest and the most vocal and the ones who are out here marching and protesting are in danger. But no, Historians are also in danger. Activists are also in danger. People who curate history are also in danger. Why? Because you are the keepers of your culture. And there are a lot of people who don't want our culture to be kept. As a matter of fact, they want to be destroyed altogether. So you too need to be paying attention. All right? Just want to put that out there. You're not safe either, unfortunately, from someone targeting you as well. So let's watch out for each other. Let's care for our elders. If you are in contact with the older people who are activists and historians, check up on them, see how they're doing, check in with them. Make sure that they're not by themselves, especially at night where there are no cameras and things of that nature. All right. And also in crime news today, cops are investigating, or the Los Angeles Police Department was also investigating Nipsey Hussle at the time of his death. Now, a lot of people are concerned about this because, and the article is on my Black Table Talk Facebook page. If you go and read the article, it talks about the fact that they were investigating him because they suspected that he was still using his business as a cover for gang involvement. But apparently he was not doing that. And whoever was trying to investigate them, there was a lot of conflict around that. And so they were trying to get him evicted off of the space that he was in. And he had to, I think it said he wound up paying like $2.5 million or something like that in fees to deal with the whole eviction situation. But something happened. The owners of the property realized what was happening, and the owner of the property said, hey, we will sell you the entire property. So the property that people were trying to get him evicted off of, it was turned in his favor, and he wound up buying that property, which has now become the Marathon and that whole area. So he bought the block. And obviously, I happen to think, this is not definitive, but I happen to think somebody got upset with him sort of getting around being evicted and displaced from this block. So he winds up buying the block. Things are going well. And next thing you know, he's murdered. And now they're saying that all of the people, I guess the business owners that he was helping in that space, that some of them are under investigation as well for quote unquote gang activity. Also known as, we're going to find a way to criminalize you, therefore remove your business, therefore remove your influence in the community. It sounds a little bit like COINTELPRO 3.0 to me. So there's still some questions about that. That is an ongoing news story, but I do encourage people to pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention. All right, in business news, Mellody Hobson, wife of George Lucas of Star Wars fame, has gotten promoted to co-CEO of Ariel Investments, and she has now become and will become the largest shareholder in that company. In the arts, if you are in Detroit, the Stevie Wonder mural is done. It is on the side of the Music Hall building in Detroit. You can go check it out. It looks amazing. If you are in Detroit, I encourage you to go and check that mural out. In the area of law, and we're moving right on through, in the area of law, attorney Benjamin Crump is finally beginning a crusade against police brutality through through law practice, through creating new laws and new standards. All right. Most people know Attorney Crump from his role with the Trayvon Martin case, and he's gone on to do other cases dealing with civil suits. And what he said was, he thought that if, a person was fined or a department was fined $5 to $10 million every time they shot a black or brown person, he said that he thought that would be enough, that they would stop doing it. Well, he says fines and money is not enough. They need to go to jail. So now he is on a new crusade to actually look at some legal ways to make that happen, so that people can actually stop killing us unarmed and for no reason. So I applaud Attorney Crump for turning his attention to look at policies as opposed to just getting money. In education, my last topic for today. In education, 2 Atlanta area high school students led their debate team to their second win, making them history makers with an undefeated record during the Harvard International Debate Tournament. They have won 2 years in a row, and those 2 students were DJ Roman and Keith Harris from 2 area high schools in Atlanta, 2 African American young men. Hats off to them for history making. So now that we are done with our news, let's talk about, how do we know if something is racist? Dr. Ibram X. Kendi was on the morning show today, and he was talking about this. Ibram X. Kendi is who we're going to be reading from in just a moment. He is the professor and director of the Anti-Racist Research Center at American University in Washington, D.C. And he said, there is no such thing as not racist. He said, you're either racist or anti-racist. And what does that have to do with anything? Well, in the news lately, we know who has been trying to garner people's attention by saying outrageous things on Twitter. We're not going to say his name on this program, but he said one of the most famous sayings that most Black Americans have probably heard at some point in their life from someone who is ignorant of our country's history. And that phrase is, if you don't like it here, go back to wherever you came from. Or most people say, go back to Africa, as if we all came from Africa. Yeah, some of us were born here. Remember that? We're the ones called indigenous. Some of us are natives. Yeah, we're also called indigenous. So to tell us to go back from where we came from is really ridiculous to say, because we didn't come from anywhere. We were born here. All right. So we know that that term was used recently to address 4 congresswomen who were duly elected through process and voting by their constituents to represent certain interests on Capitol Hill. Interests, as they said, like clean water. Interests like dealing with the healthcare system, right? So they realized that this was a distraction, but Mr. Kendi began to talk about the fact that what makes something racist is the view of either superiority or inferiority about a group. Superiority or inferiority about a group. If I say that you are inferior because of the color of your skin, I am saying something that is racist. If I am saying or denoting something about a group of people as superior or inferior because of who that group of people is, it can be considered racist. All right? And then he said this. They asked a question. They said, well, people are saying that they didn't actually say a race. So how can you say that something is racist if the person never actually mentioned a specific group? That's a good question. And as he pointed out, poll taxes don't mention a specific group, but they do exclude a specific group of people. The grandfather clause, all right, back in the day, that if your grandparent, it was like based on how many generations you could go back. It was called the grandfather clause. Well, most Black Americans' grandparents were slaves, so they weren't voting. So if you make a clause, again, that excludes a group of people, it's racist. Okay? So you don't necessarily have to mention race for something to be racist. I say this often. Most of you all know it. Racism is spelled Policy. I don't have to put your name in something. For example, somebody doesn't have to say to me, Shantae is not invited to the party. All they have to do is say, anybody wearing a black sweater and a yellow shirt with a yellow headband with their hair in a ponytail and wearing orange nail polish is not invited. You can pretty much figure out I would be excluded from that, right? So it is the language and the wording of something that can exclude people. You don't necessarily have to say Black people can't come to this facility. You just have to do like the pool owners did, I believe, in either North Carolina or South Carolina, where they said you can't have hair extensions at our pool. You cannot have braids that are hair extensions at our pool. All right? And people know that culturally, more than likely, you're talking about African American women. Okay? So again, you can create something that never mentions race, but still excludes a group of people. You don't have to have racial language to exclude a group. When you are creating inequity with a policy, it can be considered racism. Racism, in my opinion, is spelled Policy. All right. So as we continue our Black Table Talk, let's talk from Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. We have been looking at early America, and we have been looking at the chapter called Black Exhibits, or Black Exhibitionists, or Black people put on display to either prove or disprove their inferiority. And we stopped at Phyllis Wheatley and how she began to be paraded around as some people would say, the miracle Negro, right? She began to be paraded around as this person who was this shining example that, see, Black people are not inferior, or Black people are not unintelligent. They actually have intelligence. And somebody said, this gentleman by the name of Richard Nisbet said, a single example of a Negro girl writing a few silly poems to prove that the Blacks are not deficient to us is not enough. So he was basically saying, listen, you have to bring me more than one smart Black person to prove that Black people are not inferior. And this was said in 1773. Why is it 2019 and we still have this attitude, especially in North America? So let's take a look at what else is happening in the late 1700s. Thomas Jefferson was spending even more time away from law in 1773 to oversee the building of his plantation, Monticello, which is still standing in the region that I visit every weekend. But his mind, like the minds of many rich men in the colonies, remained on building a new nation. They were reeling from British debt, taxes, and mandates to trade within the empire. They had the most to gain in independence and the most to lose under British colonialism. Politically, they could not help but fear all those British abolitionists opposing American slavery, toasting Phyllis Wheatley and freeing the Virginia runaways. Financially, they could not help but salivate over all those non-British markets for their goods and all those non-British products they could consume, like the world-renowned sugar that French enslavers forced Africans to grow in what is now Haiti. Rebel Virginia legislators met in Williamsburg in 1774. Now I've had an opportunity to go to Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. All of them are situated together in what I call the triangle or the ground zero of white supremacy in America. If you've ever been to that region, you can actually feel the oppression there. They still have a colonial mindset. And I say hats off to my brothers and sisters who live and work there every single day, because I probably could not do it. One of Virginia's staunchest rebel legislators sent in a scorching freedom manifesto. It was entitled A Summary View of the Rights of British America. Can any one reason be assigned why 160,000 British electors should make laws for 4 million equal Americans? His Majesty said the author had rejected our great object of desire, to abolish slavery and the slave trade, and thus disregarded the rights of human nature, deeply wounded by this infamous practice. Some politicians folded over in disgust as they took in Thomas Jefferson's rhetorical gunshot at slavery. But several of the author's admirers loved his clever turn. He began to blame England for American slavery. Printed and circulated, Summary View piloted Jefferson into the clouds of national recognition. So, they began to say, Britain, it is your fault that we have the problem of slavery because, hey, we were just, doing what we've been doing. And how dare you all, after we've gotten used to treating human beings inhuman, after we've gotten used to the work and the free labor that we're getting through human souls, how dare you then decide that slavery is inhumane, and how dare you start closing off our opportunity to go get more slaves? It's your fault, Britain, that we're in this condition. The British and some Americans immediately began questioning the authenticity of a slaveholder throwing a freedom manifesto at the world. No one could question the authenticity of Phyllis Wheatley's 1774 words, quote, "In every human breast, God has implanted a principle which we call love of freedom." Or the Connecticut blacks, who a few years later had proclaimed, quote, "We perceive by our own reflection that we are endowed with the same faculties with our masters, and there is nothing that leads us to a belief or a suspicion that we are any more obliged to serve them than they us." All over revolutionary America, African people were rejecting the racist compact that asserted that they were meant to be enslaved. So this whole narrative that our ancestors were just dumb and our ancestors just accepted slavery as their lot in life, it's historic inaccuracy. And I need black people, number one, I need y'all to stop walking around saying that, because that's not true. There were people who were rejecting the notion that they were meant to be enslaved by some divine notice. They weren't going for it. Edward Long watched a rising tidal wave of abolitionism and anti-racism from his massive sugar plantation in Jamaica. He realized that a new racial justification was badly needed to save slavery from being abolished. So, in 1774, he breathed new life into the polygenesis by issuing his massive book, History of Jamaica. Why did it remain so difficult to see that black people constituted a different species, he asked. The ape had in form a much nearer resemblance to the Negro race than the latter bear to white men. Just as black people conceived a passion for white people, apes conceived a passion for the Negro women, Long reasoned, as John Locke once had. Long dedicated a full chapter to discrediting the ability of Jamaica's old Francis Williams, with, he assured, the impartiality that becomes me. Williams' talents were the result of the northern air of Europe, he said. Long then contradictorily questioned Williams' talents, quoting Hume's footnote. Long assailed Williams for looking down with sovereign contempt on his fellow blacks, as if Long did not share that contempt. Williams self-identified as a white man acting under a black skin, as Long described it. Williams' proverbial saying, he said, was "Show me a Negro, and I will show you a thief." Later that year, Lord Kaimes, a Scottish judge and philosopher, and one of the engines of the Scottish Enlightenment, followed Long's history with sketches of the history of man. The devastating treaty attacked assimilationist thinking and tore apart monogenesis, which assumed that all races were one species. Kaimes' book carried more force than Long's. Few thinkers in the Western world had the intellectual pedigree of Lord Kaimes in 1774. He paraphrased Voltaire, another supporter of polygenesis, explaining, "There are several different species of men as well as of dogs. A mastiff differs not more from a spaniel than a white man from a Negro. Climates created the species, but they could not change one color to another," Kaimes maintained. Dismissing Adam and Eve, Kaimes based his multiple creations on the Tower of Babel story in Genesis. So these people are actually trying to reinforce slavery. They're trying to reinforce inhumanity by writing these humongous books of doctrines of devils, because that's what it was. All right? No way around that. They were writing these books trying to intellectualize their racism. Sounds like 2019. Polygenesis loved sketches. Christian monogenesis bristled at its blasphemy. But the concept of different creation stories in different species started making sense to more and more people in the late 18th century as they tried to come to grips with racial difference. How else could they explain such glaring differences in skin color, in culture, in wealth, and in the degree of freedom that people enjoyed? If someone had told Lord Kaimes that a German doctoral student, 56 years his junior, would lead the initial charge against his theory, the old jurist would probably have laughed, and he was known for his sense of humor. Unlike Lord Kaimes, I have written this book quite unprejudiced, the audacious young Johann Friedrich Blumenbach claimed in his book On the Natural Variety of Mankind. Environment, not separate creations, caused the variety in humans, the German wrote in 1775. Blumenbach followed Linnaeus in allotting 4 classes of inhabitants or races. The first and most important to us is that of Europe, he theorized. All these nations regarded as a whole are white in color and, if compared with the rest, beautiful in form. A full-blown debate on the origins of humans had exploded into the European world during the American Revolution. Backing up Blumenbach against Long and Lord Kaimes was none other than the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, soon to be widely heralded for his legendary Critique of Pure Reason. Kant lectured on the rule of Buffon, or the rule of Buffon, that all humans were one species from the same natural genus. Now, This seems to be common sense in 2019, but it was not common sense in the 1700s. They were still figuring this out. Europe was the cradle of humanity. They believed that in the late 1700s. Now, in 2019, we actually know that Africa was the cradle of humanity, not Europe. The inhabitant of Europe had, quote, a more beautiful body, they thought, works harder, is more controlled in his passions, and more intelligent than any other race of people in the world. Blink, blink. Kant lectured, humanity at its greatest perfection in the race of whites. American intellectuals followed this debate between monogenesis and polygenesis in the same way that students would follow the debates of their professors. And in following the racist debate, American intellectuals followed the racist debaters. American enslavers and secular intellectuals most likely lined up behind Lord Keynes and other polygenicists. Abolitionists and theologians more likely lined up behind Immanuel Kant and other monogenicists. But these American polygenicists and monogenicists had no problem coming together to inflame the public sentiment against England and dismiss their own atrocities against enslaved Africans. Why do I feel like I'm reading 2019 and 1700s? All right? This sort of notion of blaming everyone else for the atrocities that you're inflicting on the people who are in your country. One man, Samuel Johnson, had no problem calling out Americans on this hypocrisy. Johnson was perhaps the most illustrious literary voice in British history. When he opined about public debates, intellectuals in America and England alike paid attention. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin were among those who admired his writings. Johnson did not return the admiration. He actually loathed America's hatred of authority, their greedy rushes for wealth, their dependence on enslavement, and their way of teaching Christianity to make black people docile. I am willing to love all mankind except an American, he once said. Benjamin Franklin had spent years across the water lobbying English power for a relaxation of its colonial policies. He was arguing that England was enslaving Americans and regularly using that analogy that England was making American whites black. All along, Samuel Johnson hated this racist analogy. As Franklin sailed back to America at the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War in 1775, Johnson released Taxation, No Tyranny. He defended the coercive acts, judged Americans as inferior to the British, and advocated the arming of enslaved Africans. How is it, Johnson asked, that we hear the loudest yells for liberty among the drivers of Negroes? Someone in the colonies had to officially answer the great Samuel Johnson, and that someone was Thomas Jefferson. So, British people had a huge problem with Americans crying out about how oppressed they were. And the British were like, look, how are y'all saying that y'all are oppressed when y'all are over there oppressing Africans? You all have not stopped, and you don't want to stop. So what is this foolishness? Get out of our face. We don't want to hear it. So, of course, all of this is happening before July 4th, 1776. You know, that's the part that's not in the history books. That while America was crying, give us freedom, Britain was crying, you're a hypocrite, because you're yelling out freedom, give us freedom, but you yourself will not give freedom to the enslaved. All right, let me move to my next book. Let's read a little segment out of Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. If you've been reading along with us, you know that this is a pretty intense book. We have covered, let's see what we have covered so far. We've covered and answered the question, would Jesus whoop a child? We've talked about extending the master's lash and how whooping your child is actually an extension of what the slave master was doing to everyone to keep them in line. We've talked about the term a love whooping, all right, and why that's sort of an oxymoron. And now we're going to talk about how black boys who are whooped by their mothers grow up to mistreat other black women. This is a sensitive topic. I can tell you right now, people are probably not going to agree. There are going to be people who are going to be angry. But one thing I can say about this author is she uses stories, but she also uses data. So let's get into the topic. We're going to start the topic today. We're not going to finish it today. Consider the following story. Robert Gordon, who grew up in Northeast Baltimore, can still remember a whooping his mama gave him in the summer of 1978 when he was 8 years old. He was taking a bath with his two older brothers. When they stepped out of the tub, their mother was waiting for them with a belt looped around her hand. Now, if you've ever been whooped while wet, you know that the purpose of doing that is to make sure that you don't have scars. If you've never been whooped while wet, thank God. The boys were still wet from the tub. Gordon, having gotten out last, watched as his mother hollered and wildly whooped his brothers into a helpless frenzy. Gordon felt frozen in place as he watched the belt repeatedly land on different parts of his brothers' bodies. Head, neck, back, legs, stomach, whatever was in the way. They jerked and grunted like electricity was coursing through their limbs. Gordon's heart raced. He knew he was next. When his mother finally turned to him, she was cussing and her voice was sneering as spit flew out of her mouth. She drew her arm back and brought the full swing around, with the belt landing directly on Gordon's male parts, searing the flesh like fire. Gordon choked on his scream, his legs buckled, his eyes rolled back in his head. He fell into a heap on the floor, rolled into a ball, and cupped his genitals with both hands in an effort to soothe the pain. Once I fell, my butt was grass, Gordon recalled. That was the most excruciating pain I had ever felt in my life. His brothers laughed as he rolled around and his mother paused for just a moment. But then she was like, okay, he's not dying. And the beating commenced again. I could not move, but she didn't stop wailing on me, he said in an unsteady voice. Gordon paused and then let out a long sigh. It's scary that I can still remember this. I was laying on the ground crying and begging her to stop, and my brothers were making fun of my pain. When the whooping ended, his mother stood there for a few moments, breathing hard with her hair askew. One of her hands was still gripping the belt while the other hand curled and uncurled into a fist. She didn't say a word. She just turned and left the room. It took Gordon several minutes to catch his breath and for his body to calm. I didn't get up immediately. I just laid on the floor and cried. Nobody consoled him. His brothers continued joking and laughing. I guess at some point it helped me to get through the pain and make light of what happened. I had welts all over my body, but we accepted that as part of the experience of getting whooped. We didn't see it as abuse because we were not taught that it was abuse. Gordon says he hasn't really been able to talk openly about this incident. It's only the worst example of what he experienced. His mother hit him with a bag of school books, a plastic bat, and her fists. He recalls her hitting one of his brothers with a broken pool stick. On top of the whoopings, she did a lot of cursing. She'd say stuff like, "Who the F do you think you are? You gonna stop playing with me?" She didn't give long speeches, just a lot of curse words. I got punched in the face a lot. There were times that I got cut and she busted my lips. You didn't go to the hospital, you just dealt with it. It is what it is, he said in a resigned voice. For a long time, Gordon says he rationalized his mother's cruelty as love and protection. He also felt pressured by family members to accept this. But perhaps most surprisingly, he says popular messages about what black parenting looked like seemed to reinforce the notion that his mother's violent behavior was actually good for him. Gordon's story is more extreme than the actions taken by most parents who whoop their children today. But many black men experience varying degrees of this type of violence in their early childhood. And that violence, when it occurs, can cause boys to develop deeply negative, long-lasting attitudes and to project their repressed pain and anger toward women when they become adults. When a mother beats her son, it damages perception of a woman's worth and can cause him to become unsympathetic to a woman's needs. This dynamic is infrequently discussed because it centers black men as victims of pain at the hands of their mothers, while also offering an uncomfortable reason why grown men treat women poorly. In essence, it sounds like BS, but decades of scientific literature have repeatedly confirmed this complex cycle of hurt. Victims of racist oppression create their own victims. Part of being a victim of any type of violence is that it can predispose you to victimize someone who is weaker than you, who you love, and that in turn exacerbates your own victimization. If you are constantly living in fear for your children and for your own life, then it can be easy to misconstrue cruelty as love. If we want to fully understand the sexist and racist victimization of black women in America, we must understand how racist devaluation and misogyny have sought to destroy us by orienting black mothers to be the perpetrators of physical harm against our children, in particular black boys. Now, there is a movie out recently. I cannot think of the name of it, but it's starring, what's that lady's name? It's starring Octavia Spence. That movie is about a black woman who takes in, I believe, some white visitors and winds up doing all kinds of very, let's just say it's a horror movie, all right? And I was trying to explain to someone that this is not a good movie. This is not a movie for us. It's not a movie that is going to help the view that people already have of black women. And so somebody asked me, why wasn't I going to watch it? And I said, well, I try not to watch things that don't help the view that people have of black women. That's sort of my, I guess you could call it my low bar. My low bar, all right? If it's presenting an extremely negative view, I'm trying not to participate in it, all right? But what she is saying here is that when a black female parent is put in the position of disciplining her child and she uses violence to do it, it's going to have some long-term effects, not just on the male child, but it's going to have long-term effects on every woman that male child encounters from that point on. They're going to be affected by the discipline or the practice of discipline that was inflicted on that child. So, she says, the need to have the difficult conversations about the abuse of black boys is bumping up against a strong taboo in the black community. And she is right. The criticizing of mothers who whoop their sons in the name of discipline and strong parenting, especially if it's a single mother and there is no male figure in the home. Gordon recalls that for his mother, she was simply doing what black parents did. In my mother's mind, you beat your kids because you love them. You do what you have to do to keep your kids from becoming criminals, he says. During Jim Crow, the the great literary figure Ralph Ellison first described this black parenting phenomenon in a 1963 essay called by saying this: even parental love is given a qualitative balance akin to sadism. The horrible thing is that cruelty is also an expression of concern and of love. Though Gordon understands the pressure that his mother and other black women have faced, he's been unable to reject the truth that his mother's cruelty actually hurt him. Almost 40 years later, his body still holds the pain. And unlike black athletes, rappers, politicians, movie stars, and preachers who wax on and on about their mother's love and glorify their mother's violence against them while repressing their true feelings, Gordon wants to tell his story authentically, even though he knows that calling out the black mother is a cultural no-no. It took Gordon until his early 30s to realize that his mother's beatings and verbal abuse stemmed from her own issues around abandonment and emotional neglect. The frustration that his father was not in the picture. As he learned more about his mother's childhood experiences, he concluded that the brunt of that beating in the shower and every beating she gave me was displaced anger. She was taking her anger toward everyone else out onto me. I would get these beatings over trivial stuff, and I was her punching bag. In other words, his mama beat him because she could not confront and beat her own mother and the other men, her father and her children's father, who neglected and hurt her. But Gordon didn't understand this as a boy. He didn't have the emotional literacy to express his hurt, betrayal, and anger at his mother. So instead, he says he had to walk on eggshells for fear that she would seriously hurt him. He was always on guard, not wanting to be taken by surprise again. Making matters worse, he didn't always know what would trigger his mother's rage, so he never felt at ease around her. His fear taught him to make himself small and to be as obedient and non-threatening as possible. Looking back, he thinks that his mother flashed forward in her mind to envision a day when her 3 sons would be bigger and stronger than her. He thinks that she created a power dynamic early on that cemented that she had the upper hand. There was no discipline in her hitting me. There was no love in it. It wasn't like we were bad children. My mother would hit us in front of our friends only to embarrass us. She was hitting us because she could, because she was the authority figure and could do what she wanted to us. Growing up in late 20th century America, Gordon learned early that there was a general lack of concern for his physical and emotional pain at home or in the streets, and let me add, or in schools, because he was a black boy. All the other black kids he knew got whipped at home. For the black children in his Baltimore neighborhood, pain and trauma were commonplace. So, that's just the beginning. How do we confront abusive mothers? Because, as the writer has said, in many ways, this is a cultural no-no. You just don't do it. I mean, there are songs. Mama, mama, you know I love you, right? But there are some things that need to be addressed in our community dynamic. I'm going to the last book today. And The Color of Compromise. And we're still on the introduction. I'm just going to read a little bit about what we are going to find in this book and Christian complicity with racism. This is the cover for those of you all who are interested in the book itself. Me and the cover happen to be matching. In this book, you are going to read about the American church's sickening record of supporting racism. Many would prefer this history to remain locked away and hidden, But Martin Luther King Jr. gave an important rationale for shining a light on injustice, despite the pain it may provoke. Like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light, he wrote. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. King's words apply to racism in the church. The festering wound of racism in the American church must be exposed to the oxygen of truth in order for it to be healed. Although activists have achieved a remarkable amount of progress at great cost, racism continues to plague the church. One of the reasons churches can't shake the shackles of segregation is that few have undertaken the regimen of aggressive treatment that it requires. It seems like most Christians in America don't know how bad racism really is, so they don't respond with the necessary urgency. Even when Christians realize the need for change, they often shrink back from the sacrifice that transformation entails. This book is about revealing racism and pulling back the curtain on the ways American Christians have collaborated with racism for centuries. By seeing the roots of racism in this country, may the church be moved to immediate and resolute anti-racist action. Christian complicity with racism. While many Christian traditions and other religions have varied and valuable narratives, Protestants, especially evangelicals, have written some of the most well-known narratives of racism in the United States. Other religious groups, such as white Catholics, have certainly contributed, but the narrative that unfolds in these pages focuses on Protestant churches. No matter which faith tradition or denomination is at the forefront of discussion, racism extends across sectarian lines. What do we mean when we talk about racism? Beverly Daniel Tatum provides a shorthand definition. Racism is a system of oppression based on race, or based on really ethnicity. Notice Tatum's emphasis on systemic oppression. It can also be defined as prejudice plus power. It is not only personal bigotry towards someone of a different race that constitutes racism. It includes the imposition of bigoted ideas on groups of people. It is the power to enforce your bigotry. In light of these definitions, it is accurate to say that many white people have been complicit with racism. Although there have been notable exceptions and racial progress in this country could not have happened without allies across the color line, white people have historically had the power to construct a social caste system that was based on skin color, a system that placed people of African descent at the very bottom. White men and women have used tools like money, politics, and terrorism to consolidate their power and protect their comfort at the expense of Black people. Christians participated in this system of white supremacy, a concept that identifies white people and white culture as normal and superior, even if they claim people of color as their brothers and sisters in Christ. You see, I can claim you as my brother and sister in Christ. You just need to understand that what I do is the norm and what I do is superior, and what you do is not the norm and it's not superior. So again, when people find themselves wondering why their brothers and sisters in Christ can sing hallelujah one moment and participate in some of the political rhetoric that we see happening, because racism, again, is about seeing your own culture as normal and superior to everyone else's. White complicity with racism is not a matter of melanin, it is a matter of power. Other nations have different dynamics. Whether society is stratified according to class, gender, religion, or tribe, communities tend to put power in the hands of the few to the detriment of many. In the United States, Power runs along color lines, and white people at this point in history have the most influence. Historically speaking, when faced with the choice between racism and equality, the American church has tended to practice a complicit Christianity rather than a courageous one. They chose comfort over constructive conflict, and in doing so, created and maintained the status quo of injustice. Given the history, complicity is a weak word for describing how American Christianity has often interacted with race. As historian Carolyn DuPont describes it, not only did white Christians fail to fight for Black equality, but they often labored mightily against Black equality. Complicity connotes a degree of passivity, as if Christianity were merely a boat floating down the river of racism. In reality, white Christians have often been the current, whipping racism into waves of conflict that rock and divide the people of God. Even if only a small portion of Christians committed the most notorious acts of racism, many more white Christians can be described as complicit in creating and sustaining a racist society. Well, this has been The Color of Compromise by Jemar Tisby. And this has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. I hope that I have said something to get you thinking, to get you talking, to get you researching. All right, this has been another edition of Black Table Talk, where we talk all things Black history, Black news, and Black concerns. I want to thank you on Facebook Live for tuning in. If you're just coming in, you can catch the replay. And if you want to participate in our live audience, you can join me now on my Periscope at pscp.tv/Life Nation. Until tomorrow, we'll be talking relationships. Take care and God bless.